There is a reason that certain entries in the archives of the Carroll County Courthouse in Berryville, Arkansas, are separated from the main collection and housed in a secondary file that the county clerk's office refers to in its internal cataloging system as restricted historical material. The designation is not legal. It carries no formal access limitation. Any researcher who asks for the file by its reference number can receive it, but the designation is there, and it has been there since the file was created in 1913, because the man who created it, the Carroll County Circuit Clerk at the time, a meticulous official named Hiram Goss, made a notation at the front of the folder that reads in his careful hand, "Contents disturbing," not for general reference. Hiram Goss was not a man given to dramatic language. His other files are models of bureaucratic plainness. He notated them with dates and case numbers and parties and findings, nothing more. The fact that he wrote those 3 words on this particular file, and that the file has carried them for 110 years, is itself a document of a kind. It is a document of a man who read what was in the folder and decided that the ordinary system of access was not adequate to what the folder contained. The folder pertains to an inn that operated in the Arkansas Ozarks between approximately 1903 and 1911, in a section of Carroll County that sat well back from the main road connecting Berryville to the communities to the west. The inn was run by a man named Doyle Mabry, and by most accounts from the period his wife, Cora. They had been operating what was described in county records as a roadhouse, a place offering food, lodging, and in some accounts grain and feed for animals, since sometime in the early years of the century. The roadhouse sat at a position on a secondary trace that connected 2 communities in the outer section of the county, and it served the population of travelers, timber workers, and tradespeople who had reason to move through that part of the Ozarks and who needed a stopping point between destinations. Drop your location in the comments before we go further, because the Carroll County file that Hiram Goss marked disturbing is the document that establishes, with the careful precision of official inquiry, what was happening inside that roadhouse between 1903 and 1911, and it requires a specific kind of attention. Carroll County, Arkansas in the first decade of the 20th century was not the isolated wilderness it had been in the previous generation. The railroad had changed the region's character significantly since the 1880s, and the communities along the main lines had developed the commercial and institutional infrastructure of functioning small towns. But the secondary traces, the wagon roads that connected communities to each other through country that the rail lines did not reach, remained in the hands of terrain and weather in a way that the rail corridors did not. Travel on those traces was slow, often solitary, and subject to conditions that made the availability of a stopping point both practically valuable and difficult to refuse when it was offered. The Ozark Plateau in that era had a particular quality of interior distance. The ridges folded on themselves in a way that made the space between 2 communities measured in miles feel on foot or by wagon like a much greater separation. A roadhouse at the right position on a secondary trace in the Carroll County Ozarks in 1903 was not a luxury. It was a necessity for anyone traveling that section of the county on foot or by wagon, and refusing its hospitality was the kind of decision that required a reason, and reasons were not always easy to articulate when the road was long and the light was failing. Doyle Mabry understood this. He appears in the Carroll County property records beginning in 1901 when he purchased the parcel on which the roadhouse stood from an estate sale. He was 44 years old at that time. His wife Cora was 39. They had no children in the county record. They had no prior history in Carroll County. They came from somewhere to the south and east, and the records from wherever that was either do not survive or were not sought in the inquiry that followed. No one in the county could account for where they had been before the purchase, and no one had thought at the time that this was a reason to ask. People came to the Ozarks from elsewhere all the time. The traces were full of people going somewhere they had not been before, and the Mabry's arrival had the ordinary quality of arrivals in that era and that terrain. What is known of the Mabrys from the period before 1911 is known almost entirely from the statements of people who passed through the roadhouse and survived the experience without incident. These were the majority of the roadhouse's customers. The Mabrys fed people and housed them and took payment and sent them on their way, and the people who were sent on described a place that was, in the summary of one traveler who gave a statement to Carroll County Sheriff Eli Vann in 1912, ordinary in every respect that an ordinary person would check. The food was adequate. The sleeping quarters were clean by the standard of rural roadhouses in that era. The price was fair. Doyle Mabry was quiet and efficient. Cora Mabry was quieter. The place functioned as a roadhouse was supposed to function, and if you did not look at certain things too carefully, there was nothing to notice. The inquiry of 1912 established what certain things those were. Sheriff Eli Van opened his investigation in February of 1912, 4 months after the Mabry Roadhouse had ceased to operate. The cessation of operation in October of 1911 was itself the precipitating event, not a report of a specific crime, but the disappearance of the Mabrys themselves and the subsequent discovery of the property's condition by a timber company employee who was passing through and found the roadhouse empty and unlocked. He reported this to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office not because he had found anything definitively alarming inside the building. He had not entered thoroughly, but because an unlocked, empty roadhouse at that position on the trace was unusual enough to warrant a report, Van sent a deputy. The deputy went inside. The deputy's report to Van, filed in October of 1911, is the first document in the Carroll County Restricted File. It is 2 pages long. It describes the roadhouse's interior in a way that Van, in his own account written later, said was insufficient to convey what the deputy had actually found, and that the deputy had written as tersely as he had because writing it more fully was more than he was prepared to do at that point in his career. The deputy noted that the sleeping quarters of the inn contained evidence of occupancy by a number of individuals over a period of time. He noted that the storage areas beneath the main floor of the structure contained material that he recommended be examined by a medical professional before any formal characterization was made. He noted that the property included a well and a woodpile and a root cellar, and that all 3 of these features required attention from the sheriff personally. Van arrived at the property in November of 1911. He brought with him the only physician in the nearest community, a man named Dr. Ansel Prudhomme, who had practiced medicine in Carroll County for 19 years and who later told his son, in a conversation the son included in a privately published family memoir from 1947, that the Mabry property was the only site he had visited in his professional life from which he had required several days to recover his equanimity. Prudhomme was not a delicate man. He had worked through an influenza outbreak, a mining accident, and the aftermath of a flood that had taken several lives in the county's creek bottoms. He described none of those experiences to his son with the same quality of voice he used when he described the Mabry property. His son wrote that his father spoke about it only once, and that once was enough for both of them. The formal inquiry opened in early 1912. The Carroll County Circuit Court file that resulted from it, the file that Hiram Goss marked disturbing in 1913 when he cataloged it, runs to 61 pages. It contains Van's investigative notes, Dr. Prudhomme's physical findings, statements from 11 travelers who had used the roadhouse and were identified through the register the Mabrys had kept, and the results of a search of the property conducted over 3 days in the spring of 1912. The physical findings are the foundation of the file. Prudhomme's report, filed in March of 1912, is written in the measured clinical language of a physician who has decided that precision is the only useful thing he can offer and that precision requires suppressing everything except the facts. It is 11 pages long. It documents what was found in the storage area beneath the main floor, in the root cellar, and in the well. It does not reach conclusions about how these things came to be where they were found, because that was not within Prudhomme's scope. It reaches conclusions only about what the things were. The number he arrived at after completing his examination was a minimum. He was explicit about this. He wrote that the conditions of the site made a precise count impossible and that his minimum figure was a conservative 1. He wrote the minimum figure in his report, and then wrote a sentence that Van later said was the sentence he had read more times than any other sentence in 20 years of law enforcement. The actual number is certainly higher, and I do not believe the site has been fully examined. The traveler's statements established what the register could not. The register, a standard inn register, names and dates and points of origin, was recovered from the roadhouse and contained entries from 1903 through October of 1911. Cross-referencing the register against missing persons, reports filed with sheriff's offices across the region in that period, was the work of the inquiry's final months, and it was work that produced, in Van's assessment, the most disturbing arithmetic of his career. The names in the register were not all present in any missing persons file, but the names that were in missing persons files, individuals who had been reported missing by families or business associates in the years between 1903 and 1911, appeared in the register with a consistency that Van described in his notes as beyond any calculation of coincidence. He could not establish with certainty how many of those individuals had died at the Mabry property. The site examination had produced a minimum. The register produced a larger set of individuals whose last confirmed location was the roadhouse. The gap between those two numbers was one that the inquiry could not close because the conditions of the site and the time elapsed, and the particular qualities of the storage areas and the well and the root cellar made full accounting impossible. The Mabrys were never found. Doyle Mabry was 54 years old in October of 1911 when the roadhouse was last known to be operating. Cora Mabry was 49. Neither of them appeared in any subsequent record in Arkansas or in any adjacent state. The inquiry produced no witnesses to their departure. No one had seen them leave. No one had seen anything at the roadhouse in the final weeks of its operation that differed from the ordinary appearance of the place. They were there, and then they were not, and whatever they knew about what had happened on that property left with them. Van's private case notes, a separate document from his official filings, discovered when his family donated his papers to the Carroll County Historical Society in 1961, contain one entry that does not appear in any official record. It is dated June of 1912, and it pertains to a conversation he had that month with a woman named Myra Sessoms, who had been traveling the secondary trace regularly between 1905 and 1909, and who had stopped at the Mabry Roadhouse on 3 separate occasions. Sessoms had been interviewed during the inquiry, and her statement was in the official file. But what she told Van in June of 1912 was something she had declined to put in the official statement, and Van wrote it in his private notes because he did not know what else to do with it. She said that on her second visit to the roadhouse in 1907, she had been placed in a sleeping room at the end of the corridor rather than the room she had used on her first visit. She said the room had a smell that she recognized but could not immediately place. She said she had not slept well. She said that in the night, she heard sounds from below the floorboards, not voices, not movement, but sounds of a type she described to Van as the sounds of something being managed. She said she had told herself she was hearing the natural settling of the building. She said she had left before full light and had not stopped at the Mabry Roadhouse on the road again, though she had passed it on 2 subsequent trips and had continued without stopping, both times at a pace she described as faster than she normally traveled. She said she had not told anyone about this for 5 years because she had been afraid that telling it would require her to say what she thought the sounds were, and she did not want to say what she thought they were, and she still did not want to say it, and she was only telling Van now because she felt that he already knew, and that confirming it for his notes cost her less than it would have cost her to say it first. Van wrote at the bottom of this entry, "She is right that I already knew." Carroll County Circuit Court closed the inquiry in late 1912 with a finding that the Mabry Roadhouse had been the site of multiple homicides over a period of years, that the perpetrators were Doyle and Cora Mabry, that both individuals were absent and could not be charged, and that the property was to be transferred to county ownership and the structure demolished. The structure was demolished in the spring of 1913. The well was sealed, the root cellar was filled, the parcel was designated county land, agricultural use only. It has never been built on today. The location of the former Mabry Roadhouse is within a section of Carroll County that has been absorbed into the broader rural landscape of the northern Arkansas Ozarks. The secondary trace that once ran through that section of the county has been rerouted and improved to the degree that its original course is difficult to establish from a modern map. The Carroll County Historical Society in Berryville has a reference to the Mabry Inquiry in its index of county court cases, cross-referenced under the heading Unusual Cases. The entry in the index provides the file reference number and the date range of the inquiry. It provides no summary. A note at the bottom of the index entry, added at an undetermined point in the Society's maintenance of the index, reads, "See restricted file. Exercise judgment." The exercise of judgment in this case has meant that very few people have requested the file. Those who have reported that Hiram Goss's notation at the front of the folder, "Contents disturbing, not for general reference," is not an overstatement. Here is the question this case places in front of you. The Mabry Roadhouse operated for 8 years. The register ran to 8 years of entries. The travelers who used it and survived described a place that functioned, in all its visible features, as an ordinary stopping point. The sounds beneath the floorboards were heard and explained away and not spoken of for 5 years. The pattern in the missing persons reports crossed 4 counties and was assembled only in retrospect. For 8 years, the roadhouse was a fixture on a secondary trace, and people stopped there, and some of them continued on and some of them did not. And the ones who did not were filed as missing in the records of counties that did not know to look at each other. Was the Mabry Roadhouse exceptional? A thing so rare that its like has not appeared in the record before or since? Or was it one of several such places that operated in the dead spaces of the American interior, in the gap between communities where the road was long and the law was absent, and the register showed a name that no one would miss until the seasons changed and the silence had been silence long enough to notice? Drop that in the comments, because the answer to that question changes what you think the restricted file in Berryville contains, and what other restricted files in other county courthouses across this country might contain if someone thought to ask. If these are the cases that follow you, the ones where the ordinary surface of a thing concealed something the record could not fully contain, subscribe and ring the bell. The Ozarks have more than they have been given credit for, and the secondary traces have been quiet long enough. Keep moving on the road, and if a stopping point is offered and the price seems too fair, keep moving.